Watch out, you dips, I'm a gamer now! By which I mean I've now played a handful of indie games, and after a young lifetime of my friends trying unsuccessfully to get me into gaming, it seems like it's finally gonna stick, and you bet your butt I'm gonna milk it for content. This is the story of how a public health crisis, a personal disaster, a good friend's intervention, and an indie dating sim finally did what 15 years of Super Smash Bros. Parties couldn't, and so can you.
This video was sponsored by CuriosityStream. Watch the extended cut of this video on Nebula when you sign up for CuriosityStream using my link in the description.
Alright, so the first step in getting into gaming as an adult is not actually about games at all. It's about time. I'm set in my ways, you know? I've got a job, and I've already built up all these habits about what I do with the rest of my time. How am I supposed to fit a new hobby in here? Here's how it went for me. First, a massively convenient global pandemic caused basically all in-person activities to shut down for, at the time of recording, just shy of a year and counting. Some people learned to bake sourdough. I started playing video games. Second, I built a PC. She's my baby and I will defend her with my life. I built this machine for video editing, but you know, the specs are pretty mutually beneficial. That probably would have been whatever, except that the second I tweeted that I was finally assembling this baby, my friend Jacob gifted me the biggest fucking bundle itch.io has ever seen. So 0 additional money investment needed. That is a big barrier down right there. But that still might not have been enough. I still just kind of sat on the thing until... Third, I went through a breakup! Yay! Specifically, I broke up with a really truly wonderful human who I cared a lot about and who very much would have preferred to continue to date me. So I came out of the situation feeling like a mean, hurtful, elitist bitch who was probably unworthy of love anyway. And I was about 30 seconds of silence away from an apocalyptic spiral of self-loathing at all times. Yay. I was in desperate need of a distraction. Something way more involved than watching Schitt's Creek in its entirety for the 3rd time this month. Something that would max my systems and leave no additional processing power for background sorrow and despair. And so it was that I took a scroll through that itch.io list and went ahead and downloaded a cute little visual novel called Arcade Spirits, more or less at random, but man oh man did I luck out. I had, by chance, stumbled upon perhaps the perfect introduction to gaming. Let's talk about why. So back when I was in high school, my choir teacher was really insistent that everyone learn how to read music. It was sort of his point of pride that we didn't just learn by ear, which would have been great if he had ever bothered to actually teach us how to read music. Instead, the vast majority of the choir would learn by ear from the 24 or so people who came in already knowing how to sight sing, but then a few times a year we'd have a written exam thrown at us. I was not only one of the people who did know how to read music, but I was pretty well known for being one of the best at reading music. That's not the backdoor brag it sounds like. I was just an insufferable know-it-all and people took note. So twice a year or so, I would get a flood of classmates coming to me asking for help with their practice worksheets. But the thing is, I was absolutely no help. I learned to read music at the same time I learned to read English. It was fused for me at that point. I didn't really know how I knew it, I just knew it. And that made me very bad at explaining it to people who were just fumbling through it for the first time. The point is, sometimes people who are really good at a thing are the worst people to ask for help when you're just starting to learn it. By which I mean, if I see one more Twitter thread asking what games you would use to introduce someone who has never played games to gaming with a reply section full of Portal, I'm gonna lose my shit, I swear to God! I understand why so many gamers think it's a good entry point. In a lot of ways, it's basically a freestanding argument that a 5-hour tutorial can function as a game. Portal is very good at teaching you to play Portal, but Portal is lousy at teaching you how to game. Just like, let me remind you of this moment from actual gamer Rasputin's series on this topic, depicting the first moment the non-gamer lady he lives with tried to play Portal.
Why can't I do anything?
What is difficult about getting out of this room?
Because I can't see behind me.
Why
I
can't you see
can't
behind
back up. Oh. I hate myself.
I fucking lost it at this because I had the same problem with the same game. I'm literally in this picture and I don't like it. I had Portal installed on my last computer for basically the entire time it functioned, and I never made it into the first test chamber because I got so confused and frustrated and bored by trying to just learn how to move around the world. And I already liked Portal. I sang Still Alive for a college assignment. That's a true story. If you think about it like learning a language, I think most people who have been gaming for so long that they forget how they even learned where to put their hands on the keyboard are in the headspace of teaching a Romance language to a native English speaker. And from that perspective, Portal is a solid choice. But in my experience, it's much more like being a native English speaker learning Japanese. Asking a person who just learned the significance of WASD today to balance key mapping, physics, timing, and camera maintenance all at once is like asking someone who can't even clumsily hooked on phonics their way through hiragana to form complete sentences. I really cannot overemphasize what a huge barrier to entry learning how to walk is. Like, for example, when my friend sent me this bundle, he told me I should start with Night in the Woods. Now, I don't think he necessarily meant that as any kind of thought-through statement on what single game would best teach me how to play games. He was just thinking that it's a really nice little ditty that's not too tough to get the hang of. Which is true. But okay, here's a reenactment of the first time I tried to start a new game in Night in the Woods. And just to demonstrate truly how quickly and thoroughly you can forget what a barrier to entry that is, here is actual footage of me trying to recreate how impossible I found it to start a new game in Night in the Woods and accidentally starting a new game in Night in the Woods.
God damn it.
All of this is a very long-winded way of saying I and most people who use computers regularly intuitively understand how to use the mouse to click on things. And I suggest we set our collective idea of entry level accordingly. But obviously there are 1,012 point-and-click games. Why this one and not, I don't know, The Secret of Monkey Island or something? I mean, I don't know. Maybe Monkey Island is a great choice. I haven't played it. Ian Danskin, please respond. But something that I found immensely approachable about the specific genre of visual novels with dating sim components is that the entire means of interacting with the world is just simulated social interaction. This is extra clear in Arcade Spirits, where the story is about interviewing for and starting a new job, making good first impressions and maintaining solid relationships with coworkers and customers, navigating network events, all stuff that is quite familiar to me as a citizen of late-stage capitalism. But the sense of approachability has less to do with the details of the narrative than with the point of interaction. I basically understand the rules of being a person sharing the world with other people. If you want to get to know someone, you spend time with them. If you want them to like you, you listen to them and you watch how they interact with the world and figure out how they like the world to interact with them. I do this in real life all the time, and that skill set and intuition translate pretty directly to the way they function in a well-written and designed visual novel like this one. Sweet. Also important here is that this is a novel, so playing the game is basically a form of writing a story via recognizing and responding to elements of narrative structure. I know how to do that. There are a few points where you can fail out of Arcade Spirits early, but it's so delightfully unsubtle about its themes that if you've got like a 7th grade level understanding of how stories are put together, you'll recognize that they're basically points where the choice you're actually making is, do you want the story to continue or not? The player character is coming off a series of miserable jobs and just kind of spinning their wheels. As they begin a new job at local arcade The Funplex, they start to realize that this work is not only connected to their happiest memories of childhood, but something that they truly enjoy and feel fulfilled by, but they're haunted by a family curse that causes everyone's dreams to fail. The points where you can get a game over are almost all connected to this tension between following an emerging dream versus playing it safe in late-stage capitalism. And because the actual threats of late-stage capitalism, like losing one's healthcare or not being able to pay rent or afford food, are only ever hinted at without any actual mechanical or systematic interaction, it's very clear what the game's priorities are and what it wants you to do in those moments. It's letting you live in a little bit of a fantasy world. So, simple point-and-click mechanics, an axis of interaction that aligns pretty cleanly with stuff I already understand, and a clear and well-constructed narrative that's well integrated into the gameplay. So, literally any good visual novel, yeah? Nope! So to go ahead and state some stuff that's going to be painfully obvious to anyone who's even minorly dabbled in thinking about games, a really important element in the design of any narrative-based game is the balance between player choice and story. One of the major appeals of games as a medium for storytelling is their interactivity, giving the player some agency in a way that affects the course of the story. But of course, it would be nigh impossible to design a narrative game where the player has anywhere approaching the number of options they have in real life. That's just too much content. Every game is going to prioritize these issues in its own way for its own reasons, and every player is going to have their own preferences. But the question of what's gonna stick for a complete noob like me lends an important perspective to that balance. The perceived stakes involved in something heavily weighted toward player choice or impact can be kinda paralyzing when you're just learning how to interact with games as a medium for the first time. Oh god, no, I'm gonna fuck it all up and lose. Losing's not fun, this is supposed to be fun, you know? But at the same time, the choice element needs to be present enough that it feels like there was a point to getting this story as a game. Why should I sink all this time and money into a whole new hobby if I'm not getting anything out of it that I couldn't get from reading a graphic novel or something? And even within the very specific genre of indie visual novels with dating sim components, there is quite a range available. So far on one end of the spectrum is Lunaris Games' When the Night Comes. This is a strictly linear game that, so far as I can tell, has no bad endings or ways to get a game over in any form. That means the barrier to entry is pretty low. You don't need to walk on eggshells trying to figure out the single right way to win the game. But there's very little you can do as a player to meaningfully affect the story. You can choose who to romance, which affects which sexy times you get, and who will come to your aid in certain fights, and the finer points of your ending. And there are a few characters you can encourage to romance one another if they're not romancing you, but most of your run-of-the-mill choices will give you, at most, a slightly different set of dialogue with little to no lasting impact on the course of the story. You can sort of determine the player character's attitude toward major events, but you can't really change what they do. There's an extent to which this has more of an effect on the game's replayability than anything, but even on the first playthrough, by the time you've made maybe 3 or 4 literal coin flip decisions about which way to dodge in a fight, and every single one has worked out fine, you'd be forgiven for feeling like nothing you do really matters that much. On another hand, you've got Christine Love's Ladykiller in a Bind, which is very possible to fail out of early and keeps that reminder hanging over your head at all times. Which is not to say that it's a difficult game to beat. The stakes of your options are literally spelled out in front of you at all times. When you choose where to spend parts of your day, a set of cards teasing each scene spell out the potential effects on your stats and a difficulty level, and while you're in a scene, a subheading will inform you anytime an option will impact one one of your stats or end or further unlock any particular character's route. Even if you do max your suspicion and fail out, the game's framing device just very gently redirects you back to the beginning of the scene. But the way the very failable story intertwines with the game's unique dialogue system makes for a pretty intense experience. Where most visual novels will have you sort of wait until it's the player character's turn to speak and then stop everything while you choose what to say, dialogue options in Ladykiller appear and disappear constantly, and you usually have the option to say nothing. It feels less like a choose-your-own-adventure book and more like an actual conversation, where you're constantly having thoughts about what you could say and deciding whether to say them out loud before they lose relevance or let the conversation continue on. This is a really neat system on its own, but implemented in this game in particular, where the player character is pretending to be someone she's not, and every interaction is about balancing the need to appear in character and in the know with the danger of saying something that could reveal her deception, it contributes to this feeling that you're always just squeaking by.
Despite the fact that every stage of that just told me exactly the consequences, I still feel like I barely skated by through that conversation.
Interestingly enough, each scene is itself relatively linear. While you have a lot of control over the shape and tone of the conversation, there's not much you can do to drastically change the outcome aside from those signposted decision points. But the course of the entire game is a complex web of your major decisions. One character will lose interest in you and cut their own route off if you spend too much time with one of the main romanceable options, no matter how well you've done in their scenes. Another character will give you crucial information about their classmates if you choose their scenes, giving you an advantage in those other routes, but also taking time away from your ability to complete them. And a number of decisions that seem to be important for one reason in the moment can have a completely separate effect on how the game's ending plays out for you. The two main romanceable characters each have a specific way to affect your stats when you spend the night with them. One will clear your suspicion, and the other will give you extra votes. But who you spend most of your time with will also affect which ending you get. And if you're at all interested in the game's more smutty elements, these decisions are even more complex. Which sexual dynamic, if either, does it for you? Do either of them completely turn you off? You have the option to skip sex scenes on a case-by-case basis, so it's not like you're ever forced to power through something that skeeves you out, but it's one more factor in a relatively complex balancing act between narrative interest and game utility. Now, what I hope is clear here is that this isn't some sort of way to declare a particular visual novel or any game objectively good or bad. Although if you'd like to hear me try to twist it into that, you can watch the extended version of this video on Nebula or my Patreon, where I talk about a visual novel that absolutely bungs it as far as I'm concerned. But for the most part, where a game falls on this interactivity scale has less to do with an inherent quality judgment than with what occasions I like them for. Ladykiller in a Bind came across my path when I'd finished a few other visual novels, and I was feeling ready for something that posed at least the illusion of a greater challenge. And I played When the Night Comes collaboratively over Discord, and that linearity helped to take some of the pressure off of the decision-making process where we were talking it out every time. Side note, if you're looking for quarantine date ideas, highly recommend. In case it's not clear, I really like both of these games. They're both well written and exciting and sexy, and I would absolutely recommend them. But from the very specific perspective of where to start gaming, I think either of them would have presented minor problems. I can tell you pretty confidently that Ladykiller in a Bind would have intimidated the ever-loving fuck out of me. I would have been so dead focused on not losing that every single choice, of which there are copious, would have been paralyzing. But on the other end of things, I think I might have been a little bored by When the Night Comes. Bored is maybe the wrong way to put it. I think I would have enjoyed it as its own thing, but I don't know if I would have felt sold on games as a medium when I wasn't getting all that much more out of it than I would have gotten from reading a good book. Which brings us at last to Fiction Factory's Arcade Spirits, and its tremendously welcoming spot on this spectrum. More intense spoilers from here on out, so if you haven't played it and you want to go in relatively blind, this is your moment to bounce. Arcade Spirits is a romantic visual novel where you play as Ari Cater. You can customize the name, but for simplicity's sake, I'm going to use the default from here on out. A 20-something navigating the job market in a not-too-distant alternate future where the 1983 video game marketing crash never happened. If your video game history is as fuzzy as mine, that basically means that video games are as mainstream as like movies or something, and arcades are everywhere, and business is booming. You, as Ari, follow the advice of a digital assistant called Iris to interview for and subsequently start a job at an arcade called the Funplex, start to take on more responsibility and discover that this just might be your dream, duke it out with a rival megacorporation trying to monopolize you out of existence, and along the way build grounding friendships and, if you want, romance with your coworkers and regulars. The most obvious player effect on the story is through stat meters for 5 personality traits and affection with the 6 romanceable characters. The game actually justifies these stats in-game through Iris, who is always listening in on your conversation so she can give you the best possible suggestions, like Google tracking your searches to give you better targeted ads, except in this case actually benevolent. So the dating sim component is kinda to the forefront here. If you want to romance a character, you'll need to up your affection with them, duh, both through the big story choices of who to spend time with and moment-to-moment choices of what to say or do once you get there. Sometimes it's pretty straightforward, like when Queen Bee and Gavin ask you to judge the winning point of their volleyball game, obviously you want to favor whoever you want to kiss. But sometimes it's more complex. The romanceable characters each have 2 main personality traits that align with your options. And once you figure that out, it might seem like the best thing to do is to stick to options that match their personality, but it's not always that simple. There are times when options counter to their personality, or even the basic option will get you farthest, and you have to judge from what you know about the character or basic people skills. For example, there's a point when you're talking to Gavin, who's steady kindly, and Percy, who's kindly quirky, and your options are steady, quirky, or basic. So if you're just looking at the numbers, it seems like you should pick the steady option, asking about investments, to favor Gavin, or the quirky option, expenses, to impress Percy. But the key to the affection point is in the actual information. Percy is a day trader, so asking about investing will light him up. And Gavin manages the arcade's finances and operations day to day, so asking about taxes gives him a chance to feel useful, even though both of those options appear to run counter to their personalities. Or there's a storyline where Ari and Naomi rescue a bunch of kittens hidden inside an arcade cabinet at an auction, and you need to find something soft to line a box to transport them. In your search, you come upon Francine, the owner of the Funplex, who has dozed off after finishing the blanket she's been knitting. Your options are either gutsy, to take the blanket while Francine is asleep, kindly, to wake her up and ask if you can have it, or basic, to find something else. Any option will save the kittens, and none will get Francine mad at you. And Naomi is gutsy kindly, so it seems like the only bad option is the basic one. But come the fuck on, why would you steal a blanket from a napping old lady who is also your boss and beloved by everyone? So you'll only get the affection point from Naomi if you wake Francine up and ask her, or if you use the buffet tablecloth instead. The result is something that feels a whole lot like actual social interaction. The numbers can be sort of a handy guide, but what's gonna get you the farthest are skills that transfer pretty cleanly from the real world. On my first playthrough, I scored really high on kindly for the first few levels, while I was just trying to make a good first impression with all these people I didn't know yet. But the more I hung around Queen Bee, who I went all in on romancing pretty much from her introduction, the more I leaned gutsy. And I actually did that run having chosen to hide the personality cues from dialogue options. That's just what happens when you start flirting with someone you dig. They rub off on you. This is also reflected directly in the gameplay through the way the separate sets of stats affect one another. When it's time to decide who you're going to ask out, you get an affection bonus to any character whose personality traits are similar to yours, so the choices you make even when they're not around affect your chances with them. Effectively, they can sort of tell if you're bullshitting just to impress them. And then you have the bigger choices of who to spend your time with, both through the very obvious where your player brain and your character brain are aligned, like who to have lunch with, and the moments where you have to weigh other options for which part of the story you want to see and whether or not that aligns with the relationships you want to build. Are you more worried about kids having a cupcake fight and or Ashley and Naomi, or a parent yelling at a child who is not hers and or Teo and Queen Bee? Do you want to join Ashley for a cosplay parade or check out Teo's flash mob? These choices have lasting impacts on the story in ways that go beyond who you have the option to date later. Again, nothing that affects your ability to finish the game with a good ending, but they do come up. When you go to Hamza's event, if you choose to network with Gavin instead of exploring the games up for auction with Naomi, you'll find out about rival arcade tycoon Deco Nami's reputation before he becomes a major player in the story later. When you're invited to a business meeting at Deco's palace, you'll meet different minor characters depending on which parts of the arcade you check out, and the game will respond accordingly when they show up again in the next level. They may recognize you, or you may recognize them. This sort of stuff doesn't necessarily have a major impact on the story. You don't unlock any different choices or anything, but it makes each playthrough feel unique and totally yours. And then there are options that can have more meaningful effects as well. Your response to Deco Nami's offer to buy the Funplex doesn't change whether or not he ends up owning it by the end of the next in-game day, but it does affect whether or not he'll offer to let you keep your job, which you can get a game over for accepting, and it changes which specific options you have in response. There's a whole secret romance you can unlock based on a series of choices that don't seem to matter to your stats at all at the time you make them. And when there are literal shots fired at your new arcade's opening, yeah, it goes off the rails, but I swear it's lighthearted and fun and totally sells you on it. You can choose who to take a bullet for. Troublemaker Sue, critic Jean DeFam, or whichever romanceable character is lagging furthest on your affection stats. This is the kind of choice that really takes arcade spirits to the next level because it's honestly a total chaos element. The most obvious choice is to save your friend, since that's the kind of interaction where you can usually obviously affect something. This will give your affection score a boost, which might affect the finer points of your ending, since if you choose to romance anyone, the two characters with whom you score the lowest eventually lose touch with Ari and the whole Funplex crew. Jean DeFam seems like a good choice, since she already has it out for you after an altercation at the Funplex had her storming out like the Karen she is, but choosing her actually does nothing, since she'll be so impressed that you took a bullet for anyone that she'll promise to come back and write her review on a less intense day no matter what. But if you choose Sue, who at this point is just some random kid who has actively fucked up your arcade opening because it's fun, you'll get a boost in the final boss fight because, surprise, Sue is the final boss. And yes, this game has a fucking boss fight! There are 4 versions of it, and while it's mechanically identical to the rest of the game, you can't bungle your way through based on personality signifiers. You need to use critical thinking skills, make judgments based on what you know about Sue, or actually know stuff about actual eating contest strategies, depending on which personality trait is your strongest by this point. It's not tough to win. You've basically got 7 shots to get 4 points, and there's no negative progress. I've only failed when I tried to, just to see what would happen, but it's still a really fun way to up the stakes for the big finale in a way that feels commensurate with the game up to this point. You've learned how the game operates by now, so having the markers you may have been relying on yanked out from under you is just destabilizing enough to be exciting while still playing by the same basic rules. But what I found not only so approachable but inviting about this game as a first-timer was that while a lot of these effects are left for you to discover for yourself, the basic mechanics of the world stuff is super clear. The game gives you some similar heads-ups to the ones in When the Night Comes and Ladykiller in a Bind as far as the stakes of some of your decisions. Anytime you're making a choice of where to go in Ari's profession
professional capacity, the options also make it clear who you'll get FaceTime with, for example. But most of them are carefully wrapped into the narrative. The first few times you can get a game over, Ari will take a moment to ponder if that's really the right choice for them, and then the game offers you the decision again. Or the first time Ari heads out on their own as a floor attendant, the purpose is to meet all the regular customers, so you're going to get all 3 interactions. But the second time, you're starting to make decisions that will affect your affection meters, so you get 3 options, but will only be able to play 2. Ari's internal monologue helpfully notes that they may not have time to address all 3 problems, giving you a nice little heads up that the way things went the first time isn't the way they'll always go, so you should start prioritizing. Even the tutorial being delivered as an introduction to everything Iris can do. It's really clever writing. I never felt like the game was withholding information that I needed in order to be able to basically play and win, but I also never felt like it was spilling all its secrets. I felt welcomed even as a complete newcomer to the world of narrative games, and I felt like I was absolutely getting something I couldn't get anywhere else. I ended the game with a perfect balance of understanding of how it was basically constructed and curiosity about how exactly it all worked, and I started replaying it basically immediately to try to break it open and see what made it tick. Also, I was still on the rebound during a pandemic and I wanted to romance Teo, so sue me. This game taught me how to play games. Okay, I just gotta gush a little more. First, this game is super queer, and I love it. It's certainly not unique among indie visual novels in these factors, but I want to mention them anyway because they make me happy. You can customize the player character's name and pronouns, and they change the game not at all. All appearance options are available for characters of any gender, and you can romance any character you want regardless. You can take that as an everyone's pan fantasy world if you want, or you can ask Iris about it, at which point she'll explain that she already factored sexuality into her calculations. The main cast does all appear to be binary, but one character will open up to you about questioning their gender if you romance them. Even if you don't, as long as their affection score ranks high enough that they stick around for your ending, their pronouns in the happily ever after change to they, them. There's also a minor character who uses they, them pronouns, and everyone, including Ari, just does that even before being properly introduced. With the acknowledgement that I am way too cis to have too much stock placed in my opinions on trans representation, I found it really cool to live for a little while in a world where passing as non-binary is not only a thing in the first place, but a totally normalized one. You also don't have to romance anyone at all. You can opt out of romance altogether at the beginning, or you can keep the option open all the way up to the point where Iris is pressuring you to ask someone out, and then tell her that you're just not into any of your friends like that you want to focus on your relationship with yourself, or that you're aro ace. If you go for any of these options, Ari's roommate and longtime friend Juniper fulfills all the roles a romantic partner otherwise would in the game. Takes you on a platonic date, visits you in the hospital, comes along with you to the final boss fight, and gives you the same boost that a well-matched romance would. These are also the only routes where Ari maintains solid relationships with all of their friends in the ending. I'm way too allo to be trusted about what makes for good aro ace representation, but I am an adult who is all too used to feeling like the world won't see me as complete without a committed romantic life partner. And we stan a self-proclaimed romantic comedy that nevertheless sees platonic relationships as totally meaningful, fulfilling, and worthy of building a life around. And this theme is planted in the gameplay no matter what choice you make about Ari's romantic leanings. During the trip to Hamza's auction, Ari is drawn in by the mysterious Polybius of real-world urban legend fame, which in this universe has trapped pop star Donna Michael's consciousness inside its cabinet and now threatens to do the same to Ari. The game presents you as Ari, now both the player character standing at the fictional cabinet and the player character inside the game within the game, with a series of of mini-bosses rooted in Ari's mental health struggles, their displacement of their own insecurities onto Juniper, and their depression that leads them to self-sabotage anytime they hook onto something resembling true happiness. In each case, you can summon the spirit of a new friend and potential lover to shut that shit down, or you can call on Ari's own better angels for the same totally effective shutdown of the challenger. Find your validation in budding romance, new friendship, pure self-worth, or a combination thereof. They're all meaningful and they all work just fucking great. The Polybius sequence, toward the end of the second of 8 levels of this game, is the moment I was sold. Not just on arcade spirits, but on gaming. I will not lie to you, I was not sober when I hit this point, and I was emotional as all get out. But when I, as Ari, wandered past Polybius and was faced with this decision point, I said out loud, whoa. And look, I have, for years, been a person who watches a shocking amount of video game content without being even sort of a gamer. I get that this is basic-ass mechanics as storytelling shit, but good God, I was in it at this moment in a way I'd only ever approached with maybe the 6 best movies I've ever seen. And again, you can't actually get a game over here. You can lose game within the game health, but Iris will save you before there's any mathematical chance to find out what happens if you hit 0. But the 180 shift in art style, the animated background, the absolute banger of a soundtrack, holy shit, I was in it! And even better, Arcade Spirits sticks the ever-loving shit out of this landing. Iris yoinks Ari back to the physical world. The game promptly makes extraordinarily effective use of its intermittent voice acting for nothing but the lulz.
Hamza shall provide you with his pants.
Then immediately drives you right into your first decision that can affect one of your affection stats, but much more importantly will stick with you, both the player and the player character, for the rest of the game. The stakes of which see your personality stats so far directly affecting the actual outcome right here, right now. And the game doesn't have to break the fourth wall to tell you this choice is important. It's telling you with the narrative, tying this moment into the theme of dreams and childhood that you've just fought a damn near literal battle over, and finally slapping a big old 6-inch ribbon curl bow on top of it with a concrete connection to the material conditions of Ari's life. The moment I finished this level was the moment I truly, honestly, fully felt, holy shit. This is what I've been missing out on all these years of not gaming. That's what you gotta get at when you try to sell gaming to a non-gamer. No pressure. Thanks to CuriosityStream for sponsoring this video. CuriosityStream is a subscription-based streaming service with thousands of documentaries and nonfiction titles like Can a Computer Write a Hit Musical?, which does what it says on the package in the best way possible. It's a delightful exploration of the possibilities and limitations of creativity in artificial intelligence, how humans can work on a team with computers, and what musical theater even is. Plus, I like to imagine Iris duking it out with Android Lloyd Webber and Clarissa. I think she'd crush it, TBH. Yes, there's a computer program named Android Lloyd Webber. Don't you want to watch that? Even better, when you sign up for CuriosityStream using my link, you'll also get access to Nebula. Nebula is a streaming service built by some of YouTube's best educationally minded creators, so we can try out new ideas and generally make stuff without some of the worries and pressures that come along with YouTube. Like dropping some harsh critique of an indie game without worrying that the devs are gonna get harassed if this video blows up. You can watch the extended version of this video featuring that cut segment instead of this ad read, along with everything else on Nebula and CuriosityStream when you go to curiositystream.com/Laura Crone or use the link in the description for 26% off your annual subscription to CuriosityStream and Nebula included for as long as you keep your membership. That's 2 great streaming services for an annual total of $14.79. Whoa!
Thank you so much to my patrons, with an extra special thank you to Andreas Evans, Danny, Exceedingly Lizzie, Ilona Consetta, Kaya, LL Milktray, Michelle, Richard Lawson, and Ronnie Rocket. If you'd like to help support these videos directly, you can become a patron at patreon.com/Laura Crone, or you can throw me a one-time tip on PayPal or Coffee.